Alright guys, back up with another video, and this time we're going to be showing an updated version of my future Gohan build and going over specific options you can play in the deck at the end of the video, as well as showing what changes have been made so far to adjust for the meta, and tips and tricks on what to do against certain matchups, because this deck is one of those decks where if you really want to play it, you need to know the ins and outs on how it functions, because one misplay can cost you the match. And also, if you haven't already, make sure to smash that like button. Leave a comment below what you want to see in the next video, especially from DBS Fest. I will be at Miami, and I will be trying to get some content. So if you guys want a deck profile or want to just come by and say hi, make sure to let me know. I'll be there the entire weekend, and I look forward to seeing all of you guys once again. Also, make sure you join the AFG Discord and check out the links in the description. You should see my TCG player link and see if you guys are looking for any specific cards for sale. You can also message me at my email at airfairgaming@gmail.com. And make sure to look at the tournament announcements section for our case tournament coming up on April 2nd for Realm of the Gods. If you guys want to play on that and you're interested in playing it, make sure you can email me there and at airfairgaming@gmail.com. And I'm just excited to see you guys at DBS Fest. So I wanted to give you guys at least a cool option that is not future Trunks, but is future Gohan. If you guys don't know what he does, when his card attacks, draw one card, and whenever one of your yellow Saiyan blockers dies, it doesn't have to be a Saiyan, but it's in this deck as a Saiyan blocker. You draw two cards, burst 3 before you do so, and you flip him over, and that's just Alt Awakening, and then he has a 4 or less, untap one, draw one, which just come up sometimes when you're playing against aggressive matchups. And holding that Awakening can be clutch, because that extra energy sometimes matters. And on the backside, he becomes even more powerful, even he still has 2 arms, but they had to do that for censorship purposes, I'm assuming. But this card attacks, draw one card and give one of your future Trunks battle cards 5k power and critical for the turn. Really strong, especially with their boss. You get double crit, dual attack, blocker, and barrier. Really strong. And then you get to, whenever your opponent attacks you, restand one of your future Trunks and give it 6k power for the turn. Really strong leader with your future Trunks engine. And let's get into it. Standard engine for this deck is 4 copies of Dependable Saiyan Trunks. Look at the top 3, grab a Saiyan. This card is beautiful, and there's a lot of Saiyans in the deck. And to evolve on top of it, you have your 4 copies of SS Trunks to change the future. This card is amazing. 1 drop, essentially, by evolving on top of this with barrier and blocker. So along with your leader, it'd be a 25k crit on your opponent's turn. It's 26k blocker, and it's really, really strong. And pay 2 if you have 4 or more energy, and you get to play the boss on top of him. And yeah, that's just about as easy as it gets, because you get that big push that we talked about earlier. And SS2 Trunks Future Online, I got 1 copy in the deck right now. Probably end up getting cut. I'm going to test this a lot more, but if he ends up proving his worth, I'll keep him in. But as of right now, he's a one of, mainly for flavor. He's a one cost evolve over top of that Trunks we talked about earlier, and we draw a card when you evolve with him. He doesn't get the other effect. He's just a barrier blocker. So he's a 5th copy of that same card, but with less effects, because we're not a future Trunks leader. If in the other deck, he is a Poutine clone, essentially, but a little different. But then we got Trunks Mightborn of Hope, 2 copies. This probably will go back to playing 3 copies of the Mightborn of Hope, but we'll have to test more. But because this one's a 10k and this one's a 5k, so just to make this more consistent, we may end up putting the 3rd copy back in, and that is a valid option. But this is a double strike, barrier, dual attack, blocker. Like I stated earlier, and your leader gives it critical, so it's 35k, almost guaranteed 4 damage. That's critical if your opponent is at a higher life total than 4. Obviously, the first 2 are going to go through if they don't negate it, and then not all cases, they can really combo it if they really want to, but they puts them in a position to where you pay 2 energy to make them lose half of their hand just to not get critted down 4 damage. And if he's in rest mode, which sometimes can't happen if your opponent makes it where you can't attack with violent raids and stuff like that, but if he's in rest mode, you get to choose one of your opponent's battle cards and energy, and it gets locked. They can't restand it. A really strong card. Then I got 1 TP promo for now. This card is a generic 1 cost counter attack. Play this card. He's a Vegeta Future Trunks Saga card. Doesn't really matter that it's Future Trunks Saga card, but it's made for this archetype and the Future Trunks archetype because it is a Vegeta you can evolve on top of. But this card is a really good card in this deck because when it's comboed, you get to restand a Future Trunks on your opponent's turn. So I may end up bumping this card up to more than one copy, but currently I only have one copy. I ended up getting it at locals. Shout out to Doug for hooking me up with this. And it restands a Future Trunks whenever it's your opponent's turn. And then you get to block again, which is really strong. So if you have this one on board or the other ones, essentially you'll block. This will be 26k. And then you combo. If they're trying to like throw 30k at it, you combo this, combo over to 30k. And then you get to attack, block again for 26k, which is really cool. Then you got 4 copies of Turles. This card may go down to 3 copies. It is not that crazy good in this deck. It is just a good generic card. So it's necessary to have, but it's mainly there because it's a yellow sand target for that's generically good for this card to make sure it doesn't miss as often. So could see myself cutting this down to 3 and adding 1 more copy of this card because it's just how synergistic this card is with the deck. But this is removal that draws you a card for 2 energy. Really good. Then we got 2 copies of Goku Black Future Line. This card is essentially Bergamo because in this deck you're going to have a bunch of yellow battle cards on board, and then you get to pay 2, play this card from your hand, or warp if you overwhelmed, and then you get to rest one of your opponent's energy or battle cards, most likely energy, unless they have already tapped their energy out. And the main way you awaken this deck, so you want to set up your energies to play this card for 1 energy, hopefully by turn 2, by charging multiple extra cards and activating maybe potentially 1. Depending on the matchup, you may not need to do this, but this card is generically good. It's a sand, so you can grab it off the top. And whenever you block with this and it dies, you get to draw 2 and awaken in burst 3, which is really strong. Then the last sand in the deck, that's yellow. You get to have the Wicked Sands as your secret rare that you can find off the top 3 with your 1-drop Trunks, and it's just synergistic and can be played very early for 2 energy and rip 2 cards out of your opponent's hand, 40k blocker. And if your opponent was stalling you out, and you can play this aggressively or defensively, and then if they kill it, you get to awaken and then put on more pressure. And that's it for the Yellow Saiyans. There's currently 23 copies, I believe, which is almost half the deck, because I think this is a 59 card deck right now, maybe 59 card deck, I think. But we'll have to go look at it later and check. But for Riposte, this is just a standard staple for yellow. Helps you floodgate your opponent. Then your extra cards that go along with Riposte and the blocker, you have the 1 copy of Power of Super Saiyan. This card was so much better in this deck at 3 or 4 copies because of the way you set up the turn 1 or turn 2 blocker much more consistently. So we had to up the count to 10 copies, replacing those copies of Power of Super Saiyan with 3 copies of Realm of the Gods Black Kamehameha. This card is phenomenal and helps you get to the late game. So if you don't know what it does, 10k boost, rest 2 battle cards, and draw a card. Similar to Power of a Super Saiyan, but you have to pay 1 energy, so that's the tough part. Then you got 3 copies of Final Flash. This is mainly energy, and it's very scary for your opponent to try to shotgun you from 2 to 0 because they know that you could have this in your hand. And then 3 copies of Frieza Army Reinforcement. You do go down to 6 life when you awaken after doing the burst 3, so your opponent does need to hit you 1 more time for this card to be live. So that's why in certain matchups you will side in Self-Awakeners to at least go down to 5 life. I used to play 1 in the main, 3 in the main of the cards that Self-Awaken because of the matchups that were prevalent, like Cell Xeno. Got 4 Krillin Super Combo. This card helps you cycle your extra cards and is the best way to make sure that you don't clog with 10Ks, extra cards, and unisons in hand, and it helps you dig as well. So it's not a Saiyan. I wish it was a Saiyan, but so that I could grab it, but other than that, it is fantastic for filtering out your cards. 2 copies of Cooler Counter. This card's it's just amazing. It's battering for 3 energy. Stop a counter. Draw 2 cards, or 1 depending on the situation at hand. Depending on how many of the cards they have the rest. No, sorry, cards I haven't. Was it cards I haven't? No, you haven't. Your opponent has rest. But you get 3 Lord Slug, the 1-drop and 3 of the other one. These cards are really strong in this deck, specifically because the deck count may be higher, but these help thin the deck out, and they go along with your theme. So they may not be Saiyans, but you are allowed to grab the this, put it on board with this, and then so you have a semi-lock. Your opponent attacks, they try attacking this, you block. Your opponent, and then when they attack again, you restand it. You can block again, and then it's just really strong at making sure that Lord Slug lives. As easy as it is, and it's very easy to set up, especially whenever a lot of decks do rely on drawing cards to be able to function. If you can establish this card in the early game or the late game, it makes your opponent be in a tough spot, especially when they're trying to use super combos to defend themselves that just don't draw cards. Then Poutine to go along with it, because this card does need barrier. So if you can establish this card along with Slug and the Trunks, it makes it really hard for your opponent to get Slug off the board. And then you got 2 copies of Vegeta Unison. If you've seen all my yellow profiles lately, I've been playing this card, mainly because it's really good against Gogeta Zeno, and it's good against all the decks that play the big 8-drops that just really want to put on a lot of pressure. Similar, this deck has an 8-drop that puts on pressure as well. The one Bergamo, we spoke about it earlier, Goku Black. So we basically have 3 copies of Bergamo, but 2 are semi-searchable. And this one hits for 2 energy, that one hits for 1. But that one's easier to find. But this one is just broken along with Poutine. So if it does come up and your opponent allows it to put them in a position where they're tapped out, they will most likely die the next turn due to fighting its fate and Wicked Saiyans and Secret Identity. So Secret Identity is really helpful against Floodgate cards, and it's also really helpful at just clearing things that you normally wouldn't be able to just kill without resting and then attacking. But that's it for the profile. But we will go into the extra things that we want to discuss. So there's cards in the most recent set. We got this card and this card. To be able to play these cards, you do need to be able to have more Vegetas. So the only Vegeta that works for this deck specifically is the one we talked about earlier. And I only have 1 copy currently. And it's this card. Where is he at? He's the guy that restands your guys, wherever he may be. Here he is. So he is also a 1 cost that you can evolve on top of for 1 energy and draw a card, and this is removal for anything barrier and rest, ignoring barrier and rest mode. Really strong card, but this card evolves over top of a Future Trunks and a Vegeta to do the father-son bonds. But this is a generic 1-drop counterattack that you can play on your opponent's turn. Then you can make this play. So if you have more copies of this, you can include this card into your deck and have it as a Triple Strike crit finisher. So it's probably worth visiting these cards and trying removing the Slug package basically to include 3 more copies of this card and some copies of this card and some copies of this card. So take that into account when you're building this deck, because there are other cards you can play. You can also play copies of Basil. It's just a generically good card. And we have the good old green-yellow engine. I love the Preach this engine because I love it so much. This is a free combo card. You don't ever charge this or anything. You don't charge green at all. You don't even have to worry about charging these cards at all. It's just a generic 1-cost yellow arrival. And once you play this card, you get a KO 4 or less. So that's one of yellow's weaknesses, is not being able to remove things off the board without resting them first. So this card is a blocker Saiyan that is so synergistic with the deck. You can play it very easily, and then whenever you block, you get to awaken if this dies. And if they don't kill it, it just sits there and it's a threat every turn. So it's just a really good card in this deck, specifically in certain matchups. So at worst, these cards will go in my side deck. But once again, thank you guys for watching the video. Smash the like button if you haven't already. Leave a comment with what you want to see next. And if you're going to see me at DVS Fest, make sure to leave that comment below. I'd love to see who's going to be there. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Deuces.